Okay, hi folks. Welcome to Dad's on Purpose podcast. Just delighted to be joined by Pete Matthew today. Good morning, Pete.
Good morning, Ben. Good to be here, my friend.
Thank you. It's no small thing really that we have Pete here with us today. He's an Amazon #1 best-selling author about the subject of money. He has his own wealth and financial practice down in Penzance in Cornwall. He's a really big deal. He's done a huge amount and spent a huge amount of his time helping thousands of people manage their money better, become more effective money managers, and become wealthy. So Pete really knows his stuff. He's reached the highest accolade that a chartered financial planner actually could. Um, and yes, it's really exciting to have him here with us to help us learn what we could do better as dads with their money.
You're very
So
kind, Ben. I'm humbled by that, so thank you.
so
And you're almost certainly setting me up.
yeah, I'm
Let's hope I
making a
don't
big
disappoint.
stage. I'm making a big stage here, right?
That's all
Um,
right.
well, and you're a contented husband. We have
Mm-hmm.
here, Pete, and you have two children. And how old are your children?
Yeah, not so much children. I'm in my last couple of months of being a dad to children. So my eldest is 21 and my youngest is nearly 18. Two
Mm,
girls.
wow, wow. So, um, really, you're like 38, but you look a lot older, right? Because
Yeah,
raising
yeah.
girls.
I'm 45 and I look 60.
Oh, great. And for you to be able to accomplish so much, I know you must have an outstanding wife. I know
I
that must
do.
be true.
Absolutely right. I would be absolutely nothing without her. She is incredible, and it's the most perfect mate I could have been blessed with. So I'm truly blessed by that,
I've had
for
another
sure.
interview this week, and the person I interviewed said his wife is responsible for all the finance, all the back office stuff, and it just struck me because my wife Kerry does that for us. It
Hmm.
shouldn't even be called back office; it should be called front
Mm,
office because
yeah, for sure.
their input is so incredibly valuable. We just get plonked in the front, don't we?
Yeah, often. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That was the case for us. It's much more of a partnership now and stuff like that. But ironically, I was financially inept when we got married. Absolutely abdicated all responsibility. Joe used to say to me, "Right, do you want to know how much money we haven't got?" This was before I became a financial advisor. I should add, before I was actually taught to know what I was doing. And I would just say, "No, not really." And that was the extent of our sort of family finances conversation, which is, I mean, it's shocking, really. So how she stuck with me, I have no idea, but she did
Well,
mercifully.
Pete, I've been listening to your book on Audible. I've been listening to your podcast. What amazing content you've been putting
Thank
out
you.
there. I just love stories of people's pasts and how wrong things went to set up the path that directed you
Hmm.
to where you are now, to the point where some of the things you said about what you weren't taught about money. I just want to crack straight into the content here
Yeah,
because we
sure.
just want to make as much of you as we can whilst we've got you. What you said about money and what your dad didn't teach you in cutting that check or writing a check. That and I spoke to Pete just before the recording about the insurance man coming around with his briefcase, and me just I was very young, but getting this feeling that this guy's got something that we haven't. I know this guy's got, and it was obviously control of money that wasn't something that took place in our home.
All right.
So the insurance man coming around to the door and collecting the money, it just sounds so bizarre, but it took me right back down
Mm,
memory lane. So, can you just give us a bit of an intro of
yeah, sure.
your personal relationship with money, Pete, and how that has emerged, how that all started off?
Yeah, for sure. So I, unsurprisingly, didn't grow up wanting to be a financial planner, financial advisor. Nobody does that. I wanted to be a rock star, right? So, among other things, but I wanted to play music for a living, but was never good enough to do that. Somebody told me to do an electronics degree. It was a terrible sort of careers advice conversation I had. Did an electronics degree, hated it, failed my second year. And to that point, I'd been working part time for McDonald's. So I went full time for them, went into management with them, which was fine. But there's a reason why McDonald's managers only ever marry McDonald's managers. That's because they don't see anybody else. They're there all the time, right? So I sort of came home 5 in the morning after a night shift. to a little sign on the bottom of the stairs. This was 6 months after we'd got married, right? So Joanne was a nurse, pediatric intensive care nurse. So she had been working, and then she'd obviously been going back through her diary, and she said there was this sign on the bottom of the stairs, this little note, right? It's like 5 in the morning, I'm knackered. I get in the door, and there's this sign on the bottom of the stairs that says, "Pete, we have spent the evening together 10 times in the last 48 days. Something's got to change!" Exclamation mark. I was like, oh, great. Never want to mince her words. So, given that she had a good degree and a good job, and I was a sort of burger flipping sort of non-event, really, I thought, okay, I need to do something different. And I had a friend who worked for the co-op insurance, and so I got a job with them. And that's back in the days where you had an area. So we lived in Cardiff at the time, where we both went to uni. So I had an area of Newport actually, and the Gwent Valley,
Hmm.
which was kind of my book. And so I would go and collect insurance premiums. And of course, the idea was that you sold new insurance policies, new investment policies to the client bank, really.
Hmm.
But so obviously, it's interesting you say that the insurance man had their financial life sorted, because I definitely didn't. I was sort of 22, and as I think I said in the book, I had basically zero financial teaching from my parents. They were, I mean, I adore them, and this is probably the only area of my upbringing which I think was sort of substandard. I was very, very blessed to have a very good upbringing, but they never sat down with me and told me how to manage money. I worked from being sort of 12, 13. I had paper rounds and Saturday jobs, and then, would do some weekend shifts at McDonald's and stuff, all the way up to going to university. But they never told me what to do with it when it came in. And so I blew it always. I never had any money left before it was time to get paid again. Interesting lesson. I had a very early lesson in payday loans, because when I had a new paper round, so I'm like 10, 11, or whatever, the paper shop that I used to work for was on my way to school. And the guy there allowed us to take a sub from our coming wages. So we were paid on a Friday, but I would walk past there every day to school. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, he would allow us to buy sweets, but he would take it off our wages in advance. So very often I would get to Friday and have no wages because I'd spent them ahead of time. So it's like a embryonic payday loan, zero interest, but not really good financial education. Do you know what I mean? Yes, you can have this money before you've actually earned it. It's a terrible lesson to teach a sort of 11-year-old kid. So I was just shocking with money. And I used to, as a student, I kept extending my overdraft. I would, generally speaking, close my eyes whenever I went to ATM, because I had no idea whether it would give me any money or not. So I'd offer up a silent prayer and sort of hope that it would actually give me some money. I had no idea ever what my balance was. By contrast, I married a woman who ended her university years with a credit bank balance and a 14-inch portable TV. So, and because she'd worked throughout and she'd managed her money, she hadn't spent it all. And so she was very good at managing her money, and I wasn't. So she taught me pretty much everything I know about day to day handling household finances. And of course, then in my job as a chartered financial planner, I now have more than a passing understanding about how the personal finance system works and the tax system and all that sort of stuff. So it's the irony is not lost on me, right? That a man who used to close his eyes every time he went to a cash machine is now paid by sort of mega wealthy families to help
Hmm.
them organize their, how money goes down generations and all that sort of stuff. So the irony is not lost, but it's funny how life turns out, right?
and and it's I imagine it builds some kind of confidence, because they people like to hear I've been really stupid. 'Cause if you just see someone's track history as never making any mistakes and it's been absolutely perfect, not only do you think it's not true, but you think at some point, because bad stuff happens to all of us. It's just
Of
a
course it does.
necessary part of life. And to hear I was a complete dimwit and a twit with money, and
Hmm.
then since that I've kind of woken up a whole bunch, I'd imagine that's reassuring for some of your customers.
Yeah, it's
Um,
a bit more real, isn't it? And it
it's
certainly
real moral.
has enabled me to build an audience of ordinary people. I mean, I
Yes.
started the podcast. Well, I started Meaning for Money coming 11 years ago. I started shooting videos. So I started in 2010, started shooting videos, switched to podcast in 2012, and, built up a pretty significant audience in that time, as you can imagine, just having sort of early mover advantage. There weren't any other personal finance podcasts at the time. So I had pretty much a blank audience. And so, it's enabled me to build up that audience, because one thing I can't relate to the people posing in front of their supercar.
Mm,
You can make 50 grand a month passively online.
mm,
That's all garbage. I don't get that at all. Do you know what I mean? Those people have hired that Lamborghini for an hour so they can stand in front of it very often. I mean, some of them won't have, but I think people relate, yeah, because I'm ordinary, and also I get what it's like. I understand how really hard it is at times to manage money. There's a million pressures on it, and I get it. It's hard. I've been there, and
mm.
some of those pressures and difficulties still apply, even though I'm doing okay. Been sort of blessed in my career and stuff like that. But those pressures, you don't forget them, and so hopefully it's a bit more of a reality check for people that they know I'm not just preaching from sort of an ivory tower. I've been there, and yeah, I've been terrible at it and learned.
I I counsel couples here, and it, sex, money, parenting, and in-laws are the four big conflict-based
I'm sure.
topics. And it just fascinates me, and I'll talk about myself in a moment, that even for a new couple, because we have to start covering money at some point, it's fascinating that people don't know how much most people know quite accurately how much they earn, but
Hmm.
people find it so hard to accurately say how much they have spent to within up to £400
Hmm.
for the month previous, and that's a lot of money, on average, if it was sort of 50 to £100. But the inaccuracy of people knowing what they've spent
Yeah.
is just so common. And I heard that in your and when I
Yeah.
was listening to your Audible yesterday, that most people don't like budgeting, they don't track their expenses, and it's a really big problem. And before I just let you loose on that subject, I was raised in a very similar way to you, and um, I adore my parents as well. They did the very best that they could, and they just didn't tell me how to do it. They had their own fears and stuff going on, and what I interpreted is, you're too stupid to deal with money, you're
Mm.
too stupid to deal with this topic. I'm not going to show you how to balance this because, and they never would have said that in words. Just the absence of the repetitive nature of teaching someone that,
Hmm.
how I concluded is, well, you're just too stupid. And until very late in life, I have just been dragging that around me like a dead
Mm.
body. And so, what was taught in the home or not taught in the home is very prevalent for people
It
now
is.
today. So, can I let you loose on that topic, Pete?
Yeah, man, absolutely. We learn either actively or passively. So if we're either actively taught or we learn, you know, out of the void, out of the vacuum. So if there's nothing coming, that in itself is a learning point. So whenever my abiding memory of childhood, whenever I asked a money question, like how much do you earn, Dad, or how much did that cost, Dad? If we change a car or whatever, or, how much did that cost? Any question about how much we'd earned or had spent was met with exactly the same phrase, and it was, "That's none of your business, son."
Hmm.
Right? So it's not sort of you're too stupid to know. It's just like, what are you even asking for? That's nothing to do with you. Which, I mean, in one sense it wasn't, but that's hardly a constructive way of dealing with an inquisitive mind. I wasn't being nosy. I was interested.
Sure.
I wanted to understand these things. But of course, what if it's none of my business? You stop asking, right?
Hmm.
If you get shut down like that. So that was always my parents' response. So as you can imagine, when my kids ask about money, I go to the the opposite extent and say,
Get
"Well,
the presentation out.
okay, yes, exactly. Yeah, let me show you a PowerPoint I created for a client recently," and they just glaze over immediately. So, so yeah, absolutely, we imbibe this stuff whether it's actively taught or it's not, and we imbibe stuff by omission almost. And so far better to be deliberate about it. We don't teach this stuff in schools. I actually think schools, it needs to be very, very high level. I think the optimum time to teach would be a tertiary level, so A level, BTech, vocational courses. I just think it should be mandatory. That because usually at that point kids are starting to earn a bit. Maybe they've got a Saturday job or whatever, and then of course from 18 they're potentially in the world of work, or they're in higher education and need to manage money that way. So I would love to get hold of every sort of 17-year-old or whatever and say, look, man, these are the lessons you need to know early on. um, and try and equip them from the start, because we are bombarded by negative messages. uh, you can have it now, you don't need to wait. Sign up to this Klarna thing and pay for it in 30 days. Well, why would you do that if you can pay for it now? And all these messages are, I think, just insidiously bad very often. This is not about building wealth, right? This is not, we don't need to teach a 17-year-old kid about stocks and shares, ISAs, not really, right? You can teach them the basics maybe, but you need to teach them how to handle the money that comes in. And so tracking is part of that. I used to think the budgeting was tracking, and of course it's only part of it. You need to know where it's gone so
Hmm.
that then you can redirect it. Budgeting, of course, is telling your money where to go in the future. It's looking ahead, not looking back, although looking back is helpful to give you a sort of head start when you're telling it where to go. So for years I could tell you exactly what I'd spent, and I was sort of, the sort of smug self sense of you know uh, self congratulation that I was a good budgeter, and actually I wasn't. I just knew where the money had gone,
Mm.
and then was sometimes surprised when something came out of the blue that I wasn't expecting. Of course, I wasn't expecting it because I wasn't looking ahead. So, it's about, I mean, there's ways you can make budgeting easier, but it's no wonder it's a massive source of conflict for couples, because we don't talk about it. We need to be better at talking about it. We need to be much more open about it. It's deeply ironic that, the Victorians would talk about, death easily. They would probably talk about money much more easily, but they would never ever talk about sex. Now, very often, all we talk about is sex as a sort of um, particularly in the West, it's everywhere, and yet we
Mm.
don't talk about money. It's insane, really. So we just need to try and break that taboo and make it more. As ever, one of my key phrases is to be intentional, right? So nothing good happens by accident. There's not a single Olympian ever has fallen out of bed and landed on the podium in the gold medal spot, right? They've worked, they've planned, they've executed on that plan, and it's about being intentional. I want to get from here to there. What's the plan for doing it? And then executing on that plan. It's just part of growing up.
Yeah. Oh, great. Just part of growing up, and I've definitely been guilty of looking at where I want to be because I perceive that person's happier and more successful over there. So
Hmm.
I want to take that magic pill, bypass the daily discipline, the daily hardship of counting your money, making sure that that payment is gone here, and then sitting down on a Sunday night with Kerry and looking at what is coming out this week, what's coming out for the
Hmm.
next fortnight,
Yeah.
is the budget on track? And
Yeah.
being an adult about it, it's just
Exactly.
embarrassing to say I've been so poor at that, so
We,
poor. So
but most of us have, though, Ben. Do you know what I mean? So I think
mm,
part of the first thing is to say it is what it is, and I'm not actually any worse than anybody else. It's just something I need to learn to do. Absolutely none of us is born with the ability to drive a car, right? We learn how to do it if we want to.
mm,
And so if we want to get better with our finances, we have to learn. And so it's like, well, we need to have that information out for people to learn from. And if we don't get it from our parents and we don't get it from school, then the only answer is we got to, go to night school,
yes,
listen to podcasts, read books, watch YouTube videos. These days it's a lot easier than it used to be
that that
to
that
learn this stuff.
and that's such a great a phrase we kick around here a lot, which I'm always trying to do my best with, is to be 100% responsible, which means I am 100% responsible for all the choices I've ever made, and I'm going to be
Hmm.
100% responsible for all the choices I make going forward. So it's not just some strike it rich got lucky Pete
No,
that
no,
I'm speaking to here. It's Pete, and
definitely not.
I love that Dave Ramsey. There's a video I watch of his where he just says, "You, I am sick of how this is. I'm absolutely sick of money being in control
Yeah,
and other corporations being in control of what I do
yeah,
with my money." And there comes that moment. Did you have that moment, Pete, where you're just saying, "I am done with the way
yeah.
this is"?
I'm not sure I can identify a specific time. Yeah, Dave Ramsey talks about being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And,
Nice.
money
Yeah.
has that effect on us if we are not in control of it. Money makes a great servant but a lousy master. So if it is in control, then that's a terrible place to be. But if we are in control of it, then it's insanely liberating. That is.
Mm,
I mean, we all have things that happen to us, right? I'm a couple of stone overweight because I have a natural genetic bent that way.
Hmm.
But if I ate perfectly, I wouldn't be a couple of stone overweight, right?
Hmm.
So I can either just say, well, it's just the way I'm made, right? And then, for some people, we're talking about weight. For some people, there are clear medical things, and I
Sure.
understand that, right? But those are generally the outliers. For most of us, we're a couple of stone overweight because we've not ate properly and not had a calorie deficit. We haven't exercised enough, right? And for many of us, our finances are not in as good a shape as they could be. Sometimes there are things that have happened to us. We may have had a terrible upbringing when it comes to financial education. We may have, started a business which has failed. We may have lost our job. These things happen to us. There are things we can do to protect against those as we sort of go forward. But while there are always some things that happen to us, there are also a great number of things which are in our control.
Mm.
And it's about saying, right, what can I do something about here? And being very laser focused on that rather than sort of woe is me. Right. I don't have a lot of time for that. I do get it, but I don't have a lot of time for that. There's all kinds of opportunity if you want to grab life by the scruff of the neck. And sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier. But we can't complain too much about external circumstances, or most of us can't anyway. Some can, but most can't.
And in your experience, Pete, yeah, for people that I don't know if they would consider them poor financial managers, but someone who hasn't quite yet said, I am the one. The buck stops with me. I'm going to take responsibility for this because I'm done with how this has been. What what would your advice be to them? What would be the common things that you see poor money managers doing? What are the habits that really people are guilty of?
Sure.
You get the question, right?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah. The, most of us struggle because we're already less than zero. There is debt around, right?
Great, great.
That's most people's biggest issue. And we're not talking mortgages, right? Because that's good debt, right? There's a clear distinction between good and bad debt.
Yep.
Good debt is low interest, but which buys you stuff which goes up in value. So a mortgage is a good debt, very low interest rates, and you're buying an asset which almost certainly will go up in value, right? You're buying a house. Bad debt is high interest rate and buying stuff which goes down in value. So if you take out a credit card and buy a TV on it, well, that TV is worthless the second you get it out of the box, pretty much. And if it's on a credit card or a store card and you're paying 30%, that's the very definition of bad debt, right?
Yep.
And too many of us have bad debt. We've bought a better car than we needed and stretched to buy it. So we have a personal loan or a PCP payment, right? When we could, potentially have got, even if we needed to borrow, we could have got a very cheap loan or, borrowed 5 grand less than we did. But we kind of, I work hard. I deserve that nicer car. Totally understand that pressure, but you don't need it. And so very often we get into bad debt that we just don't need. And so that really has to be the starting point. The problem is very often we can find it difficult to get back to zero, right, from the minus figure, because we're basically living paycheck to paycheck. So there is actually a very clear set of steps, which is, I mean, Dave Ramsey literally wrote the book on this, and he is a genius. I think he will polarize some people
Mm.
because he's American and he's very evangelical Christian in his approach. I don't mind that, but a lot of people might. But he um, he has a very clear set of steps, and he calls them the baby steps. I'm just thinking I probably shouldn't have set myself up for this because I'm not sure if I can recite them all. But certainly at the early stages, the first thing you need to do is to just scrape together what he calls a starter emergency fund,
Mm-hmm.
which is 500 or 1,000 quid that you've got and you just keep to one side. All right. And the reason you do that is because most people get into debt because they never really have any kind of buffer between them and the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you suddenly need the brake discs and pads all
It's
doing on
credit
all
card.
four wheels, it's credit card or it's overdraft or whatever,
Yep.
because you don't have the money to one side to do that. And so if you can just scrape together 500 or 1,000 quid, I mean, sell anything you don't need in the house. Do you know what I mean? You just scrape it together, pull an extra couple of shifts if you need to, do whatever it takes to get that together. And then once you've got that just small buffer between you and any sort of minor emergency that might come up, then you can really start to be deliberate about your budgeting. And then there's ways to make that easier. So it doesn't need to be onerous, but it does require us to sit down, think, and look ahead a little bit. It might take you a couple of hours a month at start. It might take you a little bit more, but as you get better at it, it'll take you less and less time. And you build up a slightly more reserve, bit of a bigger reserve. But before you start building wealth, you've got to pay down the debt. You've got to get back to zero, right? And then it's onwards and upwards from there.
There was a massive mind shit. It probably was mind shit actually. My mindset shift for me of like you having that buffer between you and the world, because I
Hmm.
was raised on debt.
Hmm.
So
Most of us
uh,
are, yeah.
if anything goes wrong, you just go into debt for it and then you pay it back. Is well,
Hmm.
it's not rocket science of, hey, what if I've got my own money saved up, because stuff will go wrong. I
Yeah,
couldn't
inevitably.
I just couldn't, but I couldn't. Probably everybody knows this, but it was only about 2.5 years ago. I went onto the AA website to find out some information about a car I owned, and they had a very accurate average annual figure that that car should cost me to run,
Right.
which I had no provision for. It was only sort of 500-600 quid or something, but I thought, wow, I look at it like tax and MOT, and a little bit to be done during the service here and there, but they've got an accurate figure. So there's depreciation of the vehicle, there's
Yeah, yeah,
dilapidation for there's
yeah.
so much helpful information out there to for me to be that adult and to plan the car
Hmm.
is going to roughly cost this much, so I can already be prepared for that cost, rather than that's just gone wrong, where's the credit card, I've now got to ring a credit card
Yeah,
company. So
yeah, exactly.
I feel entitled to that money because I've been irresponsible, and as yet I haven't really seen that I've been irresponsible about being prepared for what's going to be
Sure.
expected of me in the future. So
Yeah.
debt and entitlement, there's surely a very strong relationship between those two, Pete.
Yeah, I'm certain that's right. And it's just assumed, isn't it? I mean, if I had a quid for every time somebody said, well, I'll always have a car payment, won't I? So, well, you don't have
Mm,
to actually. There's
mm,
plenty of
mm,
people who don't. Most millionaires don't drive very posh cars. They usually
mm.
drive an average of 4-year-old. Usually something mid-range because that's. I mean, that's a huge generalization, of course, um, but yeah, there's definitely a sense of entitlement, and just the ease of which debt is available doesn't help either. But there's one of the golden rules with personal finance is to pay yourself first. I mean, it's your money, right? You've earned it. You've worked hard to earn your income. Why would you pay other people before yourself? And if you are getting into debt to pay what are essentially day-to-day expenses, I mean, Christmas, for crying out loud, it shouldn't come as a surprise every year. It happens on exactly the same day every year. And yet, people spend all year paying off what they built up on credit cards for last Christmas. And every time you're doing that, you're paying somebody else. You're making somebody else richer, not you, the credit card company. The chief exec of the credit card company who gets a bonus because you've taken out another credit card. How much better would it be to pay yourself, not pay interest? And with the difference, the money that you're saving, build up wealth for the future. Because if you're never back to zero, if you're always minus, eventually you won't be able to work. We take our ability to earn an income massively for granted. But do you know what I mean? I mean, I had just this last year, first time ever, I've had a sort of health issue, which has taken me by surprise, which I had basically post viral fatigue. I don't know what virus it was, whether it was the virus or not, I don't
Hmm.
know. But
Sure.
I've never felt like that. And it felt completely out of my control. Now, if I was mechanic, doing extremely, or farmer, doing something very manual, I probably wouldn't have been able to work for 6 months. Now, I'd have been all right because I'm prepared for that, but most people are not. We take our ability to earn an income for a living, but without it, we got nothing. And
Mm.
so we need to really just almost be uh, prepared to freak ourselves out and almost go on a mental experiment and say, well, what happens if I couldn't earn? What happens if my income stopped now? How long before I'm kicked out of my house? And for most of us, it'll be a real wake up call. And so, I don't want it to be negative. I don't want to freak people out, but sometimes it's like, you don't worry about your health until you get chest pain. And suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, right? And it's like, right, okay, now I need to do something about this. So we take it for granted while we have it, but if we lose our income, then it's a serious issue. So there's stuff we can do to sort of protect against
Mitigate.
losing our income. Yeah, yeah.
And I so get, and it's almost like the energy even of our conversation here, it's almost takes a bit of a dive, because and what people like to talk about is the big vision, the big dream, the success story, because it's positive and uplifting, and at the end of the day, that response, you are completely responsible for creating the results you've created based on the choices you're making. So
Totally right. Yeah.
unfortunately, we're going to have to look at the choices you're currently making, because that's what, it's not some big conspiracy, something being done to you. You're in a lot of credit card debt because the credit card companies are very good at selling you their
Hmm.
help, that they're going to help
Yeah,
you out of a bind. They're better at spending your money than you are.
yeah.
So, and again, I think ultimately the lesson for this call is that the buck stops with
It
me.
really does. Yeah, fairy tales have happy endings, right? But we read fairy tales when we're kids. When we're
Mm,
adults, we read gritty dramas, and sometimes the hero dies, and that's real life. Real life is not a fairy story, and also you cannot build anything of beauty without a solid foundation. Do you know what I mean? Within,
mm, mm,
below Westminster Abbey, or pick a fabulous building of your choice that you like, is really ugly but very, very strong foundations that hold the whole thing up. And so we can't have the beautiful holidays or the idyllic retirement, or even better, perhaps an early retirement. We can't have financial freedom without really good foundations. And unfortunately, that's really non glamorous.
mm.
It means taking control of every pound that comes through our hands. It means not spending some of it and storing it up for the future instead. And it means taking out some insurance so that if something happens that we can't do anything about, then there is money provided for that. Everybody would rather spend money on pretty much anything other than insurance, right? It's the least glamorous product of all. And yeah, I could tell you countless stories of people who are very glad they took out critical illness cover, or, life insurance, or whatever, even though they'd have rather spend that money on something else. They were glad they had it when life really kicked them in the teeth. So,
Mm.
we can't expect a fairy tale. We've got to sort of make sure that essentially we've got to build our own, right? So you've got to put the hard work in first.
Yeah, and I heard on your. I think we'll just end. I'll just end on this before we ask you to just share what people could plug into to help them some more.
Yeah. I should say,
Uh,
Ben, I know we had some tech issues, but don't worry about time. If you want me for
I,
another half an hour, that's fine, but it's up
I,
to you.
I think perhaps in a couple of months, Peter, I'm gonna
Yeah.
ask to wheel you back in again, because there's
Yeah.
so
No
much we
worries.
haven't done, and you're just
Sure.
a walking plethora of helpful knowledge and information.
Done this a long time.
Um, So, something you said in your book, that the choices you're making today are, I don't know if you put it exactly this, but robbing from your future. And I think Kerry and I were laughing about this, but it's 39p. I bought a Cadbury's cream egg because I saw one for 39p, and I felt entitled to have it, right? So that's not good food. It won't sustain me for longer than more than 30 minutes before I need something else.
Hmm.
But you could choose to look at it as, I've just robbed 39p from my future, and if I invested that 39p somewhere over
Hmm.
the course of 20 years, that 39p is going to become infinitely more valuable, and I might be able to buy something worth, I don't know, 25, 30 quid in 20 years.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
who
Why not?
knows? So
Yeah.
um so so all the choices we make do matter. People do like to look at the big flowery vision, which is important to be pulling you forward, but that should add even more gusto to the, I've got to do the hard yards now. I got to build that rock solid foundation. I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
go picking out a kitchen because I haven't built the drainage and the foundations yet. I can't go
That's
putting
right.
up a wall if I haven't got the right foundations. And I'm assuming, Pete, that is the same for every single person who crosses your doors for wealth management. Every single one of them have already built and taken the time and effort to build a rock solid foundation. Is that a true
without
assumption?
without exception. I have a couple of minor lottery winners as clients, but apart from them, every single one they haven't inherited, they
Yep.
have built. Right. So
Wow.
I tend to, I mean, I deal in the sort of mass affluent area. So I'm not generally, I do have some, sort of deca millionaire families. So more than 10 million, but not, I only have a handful of those. Most are ordinary people who have worked hard. Some have had their own businesses, some have worked for other companies, but they have all put money into pensions
Hmm.
consistently over
Hmm.
time. Um, and they've built slowly, which is the best way to build wealth. We're just in a fast food generation, and really, with money, compounding takes time to work. Your first 100,000 quid of amassed assets is the hardest. That might sound like an impossibly large figure to a lot of people. I get it. Your first 100,000, your first 10,000 is the hardest.
Mm.
Everyone after that gets easier because money builds on itself. And so, you've got to lay the foundations. You've got to just stick at it. It's got to be relentless. Unfortunately, it'd be great if you could do something once, but it's the same reason that I will need to eat well for my entire life. You know, I don't get to just do it for 6 months and then I've cracked it. I got to eat well for my entire life. I've got to keep going with it if I'm going to stay, you know, if I'm going to be able to fit through the doors in my house, I need to keep going with it, right? And so there's a sense, even, I mean, I've got some very wealthy clients, even in retirement, the skills that got them to where they are, to be able to retire, to be able to enjoy life as they do, those skills don't desert them.
Mm.
They don't suddenly start buying Bentleys when they've driven Mondeos all their lives. And that's how I know they'll continue to be fine. Because no matter how rich you are, you can spend it all. There's a reason why some footballers go bankrupt. And the reason why I think 1 in 4 lottery winners spends everything and ends up in a worse position than they were before they won. So it's because, you know, the skills that you learn in building wealth will serve you very well for the rest of your life. So, you know, if you can get it right and build, then you'll be fine
Pete,
forever. So, but it is consistent.
Pete, we've got just literally a minute left. Can you just direct any listener who might be driving right now where to head?
Sure.
Straightforward
Yeah.
web link.
Yeah. Dead easy. Everything is at meaningfulmoney.tv, but search meaningful money, you'll find it. There's tons of stuff on there, nearly 500 podcast episodes, probably 400 videos, as much as you want, and a really good search system. There's a learning center on the site, so you can find what you need there.
Bingo. Thanks, Pete. You've been a ledge. You are a
Thank
ledge.
you, Ben.
Thank you so much for your time, and I
No
really
worries.
look forward to
Thank
doing
you for
this
having
again
me,
at
mate.
some point. Thank you, mate. Have a great
You're
day.
welcome.
Bye
Cheers.
bye.
Bye.